All right, YouTube, you've probably already heard that we're in the midst of an opiate epidemic, by which generally it means a person has been prescribed painkillers, usually too high a dose for too long. They get addicted to it. If the painkillers are then removed, if you try to wean them off and they relapse, they'll go get them on the black market. And there's plenty of ways to do that. You see, because they're so overprescribed, literally, you had a slight headache, so you get like 60 days worth of Vicodin or something. There's a huge supply in the public that is available for anybody who knows where to get it to actually get some. Now, I tried Vicodin once. It didn't do anything for me, and never messed with opiates because I knew better. I used many other substances, didn't become addicted, mushrooms, whatever. Totally different classes of drugs. But let's put the blame where it actually belongs. The doctors, yes. The medical industry makes a killing off of prescribing these painkillers like candy to people. That's true. Yeah, there's certainly some blame for the doctors, and probably more for the pharmaceutical companies themselves that deluded doctors into thinking that people should just get the maximum dose for as long as you want to give it to them. It'll be fine because they're non-addictive. There was some funny business going on by the pharmaceutical companies. Let's also look at how Uncle Sam is involved in two very important ways. The first problem is the drug war, and the second problem is propping up those same pharmaceutical industries, propping up the same bullshit that led to people getting addicted in the first place. The lamestream media and the government are trying to deflect blame entirely onto the doctors through whatever means necessary to exonerate themselves of their own stupidity and their own responsibility. But the primary reason so many are addicted to painkillers is the drug war. Because these people, once they get hooked, they're not seeking help. They go out, if the painkillers aren't around, they start going and doing heroin in some cases. Then they get addicted to that, and they're like, oh, well, I can't seek help. I don't want to get thrown in jail. I don't want to go to some government rehab center where I'm going to feel miserable. They'll give me methadone or whatever anyway. Like, I'll still be getting my opioids. It's just something very slightly less addictive. This would not be a problem if we weren't fighting pain by using among the most horrendous class of drugs possible to do it with. There are so many other ways to treat chronic pain or temporary pain that don't involve opiates. But Uncle Sam made marijuana illegal, so little old ladies who have cancer or somebody dying of AIDS can't toke. And so it's a fucking problem. But you're not going to have a problem with opiates being... If somebody is using marijuana, it does relieve pain on a physical basis. It also takes your mind off of pain. And it's hell of a lot less addictive. There's no physical addiction to marijuana whatsoever. What addiction exists regarding marijuana is the fact that it can be psychologically habituating. That is, that a person has become habituated to using it. It's like with tobacco. Tobacco carries both types of addiction, which is why it's double as shitty. With marijuana, I took a toke, ate some pizza, and it's gaming night or something, and so you get into a habit of doing it. And it's a little crappy trying to wean yourself off of it. But it's a hell of a lot less crappy than trying to break an addiction to heroin or OxyContin or something like that. But no, you can't have that perfectly safe, largely non-addictive herbal treatment for your pain because it's illegal. Here, have some morphine instead. Don't you see how that's retarded? We never would have started using opiates for pain relief to any great degree. In the good old days, it was understood that you weren't going to take laudanum for every little cut that you happen to get. It just wouldn't make sense to do that. But now they dispense this shit like candy to some of these people. They're not even 18. They're already hooked on this crap. Number two, for chronic pain, as it relates to the psyche, there's psychedelics. Ecstasy shows great capability potentially in trials that they've conducted with taking care of chronic depression, chronic fatigue. And yet again, very, very few people get to conduct any form of experimentation in this country at all because it's so illegal. But again, it's just a very slightly modified saffrole, essentially. It's literally, it's not that hard to obtain. And again, the fact that it's illegal brings with it its own problems well outside of pain relief, well outside of even addiction. You have the problem of people making essentially fake marketing something as ecstasy, as MDMA, that's not something that's a totally different give them ketamine or something. And then call it MDMA. Say, here, do some candy flipping or whatever. Trust me, it's real LSD and MDMA mixed together. It's certainly not something I mixed up in a fucking bathtub. So you have that problem too, where you have all these substances. Sometimes people don't even know what they're getting. They get all messed up. They overdose. They have a massive psychological breakdown. They end up hooked on something. We had a problem a couple of years ago. I think it was 2014 here in Rutland County. Some sort of drug. I don't even know if they ever determined exactly what this shit was. It started circulating and something like 20 people overdosed on this one batch of substance. It was some sort of capsule that contained a slew of like half a dozen different drugs. It was an opiate, it was a stimulant, it was a psychedelic, I can't even imagine how fucked up a person would get. They'd be totally wasted off of one of these pills. And somebody was handing them out like candy to all of the addicts, and a bunch of them overdosed. We had the same problem with spice. Oddly enough, again, a legal substance. This is what I overdosed on. It was legal when I was using it. It was perfectly, completely legal. I got it offline. I got a bag of the research chemical. I started making my own spice. I fucking overdosed. And it was all perfectly legal. Uncle Sam has construed something being legal with something being safe, something being illegal with something being unsafe, and the masses eat it up. Even though it's blatantly and obviously wrong, the stuff that's legal will fuck you up way worse than the stuff that's not. All the illegal substances that I ever imbibed, none of them fucked me up. No, at least not more than... Yeah, I got high. Yeah, I was tripping out. I was seeing the mushrooms on my eyes and stuff. But the next day, I felt completely normal. I didn't have, like, lingering psychosis and paranoia and all of these other horrible things that the government always told me I'd have if I just even looked at a marijuana bud. But yet this legal substance fucked me up. Alcohol fucks up a lot of people. Tobacco gives them cancer and does all sorts of horrible things to their body. They're just riddled with tumors or whatever. And these painkillers that are perfectly legal, supposedly safe because you're getting them from a doctor to relieve your pain, are now the scourge of the entire Western world. It's out of control. Now, I will say this. Take it with a grain of salt when they talk about it being an epidemic. Because I have a feeling that it's not quite as bad as they try. They'll try to use moral panic. That is, they'll try to convince you that everybody around you is like constantly doped up on painkillers. That's obviously not the case. But yeah, you probably know a person or two that has at least a mild addiction to some form of painkiller. That's pretty given. Now, most of these people are still able to function, but once they head down that road, it becomes more and more difficult if they don't have enough self-control to hold themselves back, more and more difficult for them to withstand their growing addiction. It's just like alcohol. It's the same exact thing. The difference is, if Joe Schmo is an alcoholic, Joe Schmo can go and get treated for his alcoholism and not worry about getting thrown in jail. In fact, there's a reason for him to do that, because if he goes out wasted and starts staggering around yelling at people, he's likely to get thrown in jail for not seeking some sort of treatment, not, put down the bottle for a night or two. But that's not the case if Joe Schmo is addicted to painkillers and has already been involved in all sorts of illicit stuff to obtain it. It leads to prostitution, because somebody might need to get wasted, they're addicted to this substance, and they find somebody who's a steady source and just wants to fuck them up the ass or something, or pimp them out. It leads to other types of drugs potentially being used. It's involved with the sex trade. It's involved with human trafficking. And the doctors created it. The pharmaceutical companies created it, but most importantly, the government created it. It would not have been a problem in the first place if not for the retarded drug war that they've been pursuing forever. So when they offer the solution of, we'll just stop prescribing painkillers and the substances will get less common, what about all those people that now are heroin addicts? What are you going to do about them? Are you just going to leave them out of the loop? A few 100,000, maybe 1 million people who are severely addicted? and still throw them in jail, throw them in some gulag for the sin, the great crime against society of getting high because you got them addicted to some sort of painkiller? That doesn't make any sense at all. No, the government needs to fix this problem by first admitting that the government caused the problem in the first place with its failed policies. Mass incarceration of addicts doesn't work. It hasn't worked. It's not working now. It won't work in the future. The drug war is an abysmal failure. It costs a lot of money, ruins a lot of lives. It's pointless. It has never worked. It's not working now. It never will work in the future. No matter how much you double down on, we need more police, we need more money for them programs to throw addicts in prison, you're just going to create more of them. You're not addressing the root cause. What causes people to seek these substances? Why did the government decide to class something as innocuous as marijuana or psilocybin with something like heroin? Why did it then take opiates that are potentially just as addictive as heroin or crack and leave them off and allow doctors to prescribe them like rock candy to people? These are the questions that the government needs to ask. Now, I hear a lot of bullshit from the left about how great it will be to reform our drug laws. But what are they actually suggesting? Legalize marijuana. That's a great first step, but it's literally just one of dozens of steps you will need to take if you're taking it that slow. It'll be 100 years before we fully reform. What we need to do is simply get rid of drug scheduling altogether, treat addicts like addicts, get them treatment, we'll have a healthier society. And it'll be cheaper, there'll be fewer people using any substance because there'll be fewer people addicted to it. All these Bible-thumping moralist assholes keep saying we can't be soft on drugs because then drugs will be everywhere. They're already everywhere. You've got millions of addicts walking around this country. Did the war on drugs cause a conspicuous lack of crackheads wandering around Detroit or New York City or any of these other metro areas? Did it suddenly dry up the heroin supply? Did it reduce the number of people crushing and snorting their painkillers that they got prescribed 20 years ago and now they get it from a dealer on the side of Skid Row? Of course it didn't. Did it stop people from trying pot? No. Does it stop a single death related to any of these substances? No, it doesn't. It creates more deaths. Only now you also have to worry about getting shot by a cop because he smelled weed wafting from your property. That's the real issue. It costs too much. Doesn't work. Let's try something different. For the media and the government to try to just blame doctors. Oh, it's just your small town doctor's a villain now. Blame him. It wasn't the pharmaceutical companies that lied to those doctors. It wasn't the government that created an atmosphere in which this was inevitable to begin with. It wasn't the prison complex that keeps leaning on the government not to get rid of the drug war because they need more prisoners for them programs. It wasn't any of that. No, we should exonerate them because the government always watches out for your best interests. And big corporations, because they have names like Pfizer or something, they're making medicine, so they're the good guys. They're not just another corporation that just happens to have a more family-friendly brand. No, the doctors are like maybe 10% responsible for this problem. The rest is all pharmaceutical companies, government, and the prison complex. And you know who's not responsible? Who's not responsible are the addicts. Now, I hate to sound apologetic, but I'm going to have to here, especially with the opiate epidemic. These people were told the substances that they were taking were safe and largely non-addictive. As long as you follow the directions, there'll be no problem. But when that 60 days of whatever they were taking, or that 30 days, or that handful of pills ran out, they were already addicted. The government sat by and did but nothing, and created an atmosphere in which those substances were peddled anyway. The doctors prescribed it to them, never asked for any real sources for the pharmaceutical studies. The pharmaceutical studies companies rubbed their greedy hands together and cackled with glee because they realized they were embezzling billions of dollars from the government in free money at the same time that they were making bank off of doctors and patients, peddling stuff that wasn't healthy for them and really doesn't even help. Just destroys someone's liver over time, worse than any alcohol will do, and fucks up their life. And then the prison complex stepped in. They rubbed their hands together too and leaned on the government to make drug laws even harsher, because they're saying, wow, hundreds of thousands of slave laborers that we can throw in prison and they can get raped and then they can become hardened criminals because they have no future, and then they'll become real criminals in time. That's where your crime epidemic comes from. I wouldn't be surprised if part of the reduction in the crime epidemic that hit us in the 90s, in the 80s and the 90s, and sort of slagged off roughly around the mid-2000s, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if some of that was discretion at the local level by sympathetic sheriffs and police officers in small communities being racked by drugs who simply said, at the very least, I'm not going to jail this pothead today. I'm just going to take his bowl and break it on the ground. I'm done with this. I'm fucking tired with it. And I know there are cops that have done that right here in Vermont. Now, the federal government wants us to keep marijuana illegal. We've decriminalized it. If you get caught with a small amount, if you get caught with a gram bag here in the state of Vermont, you're not going to get thrown in federal prison for it. That's the way to do business. We've got bigger fish to fry. We've got tens of thousands of opiate addicts courtesy of Uncle Sam and our prisons and our pharmaceutical companies. I'm not too worried. I don't like smelling weed. It honestly gives me anxiety because of my overdose being on a cannabinoid. I can't be around that shit. But I would much rather see an entire army of hippies march by my front door blowing their smoke in this direction. I would much rather get a contact high and suffer an anxiety attack over that than have to suffer because taxes are higher, propping up these retarded prisons and these retarded mandatory sentencing laws, and paying through the nose for these opiates that don't work, and meanwhile depriving cancer patients and AIDS patients and people with dementia and kids with ADHD and people with all sorts of terminal and non-terminal chronic pain and everything else under the sun of one thing that actually treats their conditions. I'm fucking tired of it. And to see the mass media, to see the lamestream, retarded media of CNN and everyone else blame the doctors alone, say, oh, the government's not at fault, nothing they could have done would have saved these people addiction. The government is throwing them in prison like they were rapists and murderers and so forth. You don't see why that's a little bit of a problem? Hey, you have to hear Bill O'Reilly with his stupid bogman face up there, shining with a whiskey glow every night, talking about how somehow drugs are a violent crime. What a fucking retard. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's still living in the era of Richard Nixon, for Christ's sake. So I don't take these idiots seriously, and neither should you. We're not going to see this problem solved by lashing out at doctors, who in many cases were as lied to as the patients were lied to. They were told it was safe. They're probably former doctors had to quit their practice because they got addicted to this shit. So yeah, I feel sorry for them too, because they were lied to from the top on down, all the way from Uncle Sam down to the corporations that get free money from Uncle Sam to peddle stuff that's not even really treating anything. That's about all. Peace out.